guys. This is a white New England kind of chowder. And by the way, if you, I'm talking to my industry folk out there, my people that have ever worked in restaurants. I mean, you ever get a job in a kitchen, hey, it's Friday. You better know how to make a clam chowder, right? We're not doing a clam chowder today, but you need to know these steps. If you got to cook bacon into it, that is kind of one of the definitions of chowder, I should say. Most chowders do start out with a pork product to start, sweating things off in, which is what we're doing now. So this progression, it's important for a beginning cook to know this. So I just threw in my veggies. I'm going to add a tiny pinch of salt. This salt is going to help draw moisture out of those veggies. We've talked about that. I'm not trying to season the dish right now. I'm not trying to add a ton of salt, but a little salt will help draw moisture out. Salt moves in, water moves out. And those onions aren't really doing much yet. I've got to get into cutting my next vegetable. And so let's do that. I'm gonna do a quick little wipe down here. Oh dear, oh dear. By the way, that bacon, it's beautiful. As I said earlier, when I'm doing a recipe, I don't like my bacon to be completely crispy like breakfast bacon that I'm eating on a plate. I like my bacon to be just this side of crispy, where it's almost like a leathery bite to it, okay? And I put that on top of a soup or a pasta carbonara or something like that. It's got a different flavor profile when it gets into that crispy phase, and this is a different flavor that I'm looking for here. I'm not looking for crispy flavor, okay? So those lardons are just beautiful, okay? Yeah. Kiana, good to see you. Oh my gosh. Back in the day, Kiana, you're going way back. I knew you a long time ago in school. Hope you're doing well, young lady. Good to see you. I'm starting to hear a little sizzle over here. This is awesome. This is awesome. So little sizzle, looking for my wooden spoon. There it is. Let's get back to that pot. And again, now that it's been sizzling a minute, these veggies have kicked out a bunch of liquid, and I was just able to easily, it all just melted all of that brown. I was able to easily go in there and just clean all of that up. And my kitchen just smells like bacon and glory right now, okay? Next item I want to do, move my water. I get a little thing. I got to get this carrot going, okay? That's another part of the flavor profile. It's a background flavor profile. These things mostly cook down almost into nothing. And I like to, so I don't like to put too much in there. I'm going to cut off the top and bottom. Pardon my reach. Slow down my sweating over here. And instead of peeling this, I'm just going to use, I use a metal scrubby, and I get most of the peel off of there, or about half of the peel off, okay? So this is the metal scrubby I'm talking about. It's not an SOS pad, and you can kind of watch me. And this is what I use around the house. If I'm in a restaurant, I'm using a peeler, so it's clean, but I don't mind leaving a tiny, tiny bit of that peel behind at home. Yeah. Kiana, I remember you. You were a little shorty. You were a little tiny thing. I remember you, but you were doing it. Good stuff. Going way back. In the Wayback Machine. All right, to that carrot, I'm not going to do a perfect dice. I just want to kind of cut it down to the size of the other vegetables in the pot. I usually kind of find a separation in the carrot where it's like, this is one size, and that's, I'm going to say this is size number B. So I'm going to cut these guys in half maybe, and I'm going to cut these guys in quarters, and I'll finish them to where they're about the same size. You guys get that? I'll get that rolling motion going here. And then these guys, pieces about the same size. It's not a perfect system, but there's no waste here. You know, all of you guys that go to culinary, had me in culinary school, you know, we're trying to do those dices to show you that, to give you that muscle memory, right? But at home, man, I'm not throwing away all that extra goodness. There's a lot of waste when we do those dices. Excuse me. Again, if anybody has any questions about anything, hey, I'm here, you know, just shout them on out. I got a little system here. I think it's working. And I'm going to work those carrots on in there. And right now, I'm just waiting to sweat these vegetables out. What I want to do is I want to cook the moisture out of the onions and the celery and all of these veggies in here. It's carrot as well. Because the next step, I'm going to be adding some flour into this to make a thickener for this that we call a roux, right? If I don't cook the moisture out of these vegetables, when I add the flour, the whole thing's just going to gum up, right? It's going to be really nasty. So I want these vegetables to be essentially kind of dry-ish, okay? And that's what we mean when we're talking about sweating vegetables. We're cooking the moisture out of them. I talked about this one last week as well. We are changing flavor profiles, right? And we're removing water, we're concentrating flavors, and also changing them, like I said. So while these veggies are going, again, like we talked about last week, this is where we add in our some of our herbs and spices, perhaps, right? And so I just toasted off some fennel seed, and I'm going to go ahead and get that crunched up, and I'm going to throw it in the pot just to add a little extra flavor profile to it. Not really traditional for a New England. This is kind of an Italian style New England. I'm just putting in a tiny bit. It's just going to be very, very background. But fennel works very well when you're doing any like seafood application. So you can see the pot a little bit, and you can see me working on my seeds. I'm going to get this knife out of here. All right. Mr. Juan Alvarez, good to see you, sir. And Derek, this is awesome. Looking good, everybody. Yeah, I just did a little bit of fennel seed, toasted it off, and I'm just going to throw that in there. Boom. And again, you never see me measure or anything. I'm just kind of you know, a little of this, a little of that. That's what I'm trying to cultivate here, is people that can cook intuitively, right? Intuitive cooks are what I'm looking for. And this doesn't have to be you know, fennel. I could have made a Cajun chowder just now, right? I could have done a saffron type of a chowder or a curried chowder, that kind of an idea, right? The ingredients I'm using aren't important. It's about the technique, guys. Very much so. All right. You guys know what I'm talking about. I got some chefs out there, and that's what I love, man. I love seeing chefs showing up for this stuff because you guys know what I'm talking about. I want civilians to speak this language, guys. This ain't magic. This isn't secret stuff that we're supposed to hold close inside our vest, you know, or whatever. We should be sharing this. I want more people cooking, guys. And all of you chefs that watch this stuff, you should be spreading the gospel of the kitchen, man. It ain't just about farm to fork. It's about what comes in between. And people lost that, man. I want them to get it back. So all of you chefs can help me. By the way, my kitchen smells awesome right now. I love fennel. And so it's just this big old toasty, licoricey, fennel-y flavor going on right now. This is awesome. Next thing I want to do is I'm going to add a bay leaf in here or two. I'm going to make a bouquet and throw some thyme in here, but I am just going to do it with the thyme. I'm going to throw my bay leaves in there right now, okay, just so these veggies can kind of pick up the flavor. My thyme, I'm going to be making sauce later with a whisk, and I don't want all this thyme and stuff rattling around in there. So that'll go in later, okay? I'll add a little fresh thyme, dropped a bit, darn it. So you guys can see that right there. That'll be coming back later. The next step, once I get all of this cooked out, again, trying to get these vegetables translucent, and they're not quite there. And I'm trying not to develop any browning, which I'm not. It's looking quite beautiful, actually. Isn't she lovely? Yeah, you better believe it. The bay leaves are kind of releasing some flavor in there. My milk is scalded and all is right with the world, okay? The next thing I want to do, I dropped a little piece of bay leaf. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be adding flour. That'll be the next step. We call this songer. You're sprinkling in a little bit of flour, and this is going to make what we call a roux. It's flour and fat cooked together, and this is what we're thickening with, okay? And so next step, songer flour. I love that word. It just sounds so cool, okay? So let me get a little flour here and make sure I don't mix it up, okay? So this is my flour, and this is my coffee, okay? Coffee. It's not going to be coffee for long. This is Quarantine Kitchen Happy Hour. My veggies are not quite sweated out. I think what I'm going to do is finish this and get a little wine. I'm going to start on some of that wine. If you guys would like to join me, please do. Looks like I got Jim out there. Hey, thanks for coming along, Chef. I was just talking about it. It's really nice to see chefs coming in and watching this stuff because, you know, I'm hoping, you know, hey, it ain't any, you know, it's real stuff, right? It works. It works. We're going to start on wine now. I got this cheater wine opener. And there she is. All right, and we're not doing too bad. This is actually going to start coming together pretty quickly here, to be honest. It'll be together before you know it. Ms. Allison, always a pleasure to see you, young lady. Ms. Allison has been to almost every live show I've done in town. Not to every showing, but she's seen almost every class I've offered. Amazing. Allison, to you. Yeah. I hope you've learned a thing or two. At least one thing in every class. I hope. That's a pretty low bar. Oh man, this is smelling really good, okay? So the next thing I'm going to do, it's going to seem a little strange. I'm turning down my heat right now. I'm pretty much done. These onions are looking pretty translucent. Another little thing to notice here is there's no steam rising off of this. And so that's kind of telling me, hey, Dave, I've cooked most of my water out of these vegetables, and you can probably add your flour in without gumming things up too much, okay? We want kind of a dry environment there. And so I'm not measuring here. I'm just going to toss in a little rule with roux, a roux rule. 1 pound of roux. Let's give you a couple of roux rules. I better back up. Roux is flour and fat cooked together, used for making sauces. R-O-U-X. Now, the ratio between flour and fat in most applications, teaching applications, they will tell you equal amounts by weight. So 4 ounces on a scale of fat and 4 ounces on a scale of flour. But I tend to teach add enough fat to make it look like wet sand, okay? I almost want a little bit of flow to this. You know how you play patty cake with wet sand and it starts getting wet and smoothing out, right, and spreading out? That's what I want for my roux, because if my roux remains clumpy, it's not going to spread out and it's not going to cook very efficiently. I want it to spread. So I tend to have a slightly wet roux, but I find that if you go for that original amount, that ratio I mentioned, that half and half by weight, that's a really thin roux and it really, really spreads. It's a little too oily in my opinion. By the way, fat is expensive, and all of the fat that you're putting in there, it's going to add flavor to it, but all of that fat's basically going to get skimmed off. It all rises to the surface and you skim that stuff while it's cooking, right? And so it's going in and it's coming out. Really all the fat's doing, it's acting as a vehicle for the starch granules that are going to be thickening your sauce. That's kind of an important point right there. I'm going to give it another little stir, and we're cooking this off at a low temp. Let me kind of turn it up slightly. So I'm on about 2 out of 10 here, very low temp. You should hear just the slightest little sizzle, and you shouldn't see any browning on this, right? We're making kind of a light colored or white roux here. I tend to actually go blonde for you chefs out there that know what I'm talking about. I don't like a white roux. It tastes like starch. I don't like it. So I'm going to take this to about a blonde, and you see I've just spread it all out, and I'm going to let it sit for a little while and cook a little more. So I just mentioned that the fat is a vehicle for the starch granules. Every single molecular little starch granule in there is going to be a tiny, tiny little sponge. And when we start adding water or milk or stock or whatever to this, those sponges are going to swell up, right? If I just throw flour, raw flour, into some liquid, I got that warm milk over there. If I did that, it would all just clump up, right? It would just turn to paste and it wouldn't work for me. But if I cook it in a little bit of fat, if I cook that flour in a little bit of fat and then drop it into that milk, now it's going to disperse evenly. So the fat is a vehicle for the starch. So you see, I really, really worked it. I'm spreading it out again. And I'm just going to cook it a little bit longer. It's hard to really see the colors in there because you've got ingredients. The carrot will turn everything orange. It's kind of orangey in there, right? And so all those ingredients are just kind of hanging back. And I'm just kind of cooking this roux out. La, la, la. I think while that cooks, I'm going to do a few other things. I've got the skin on the surface of that milk. I'm going to remove that. So let me show you what that looks like. I'll do it right here. I'm going to lay a towel down. I don't like putting a pot on my cutting board. That drives me nuts. My old students will tell you that. Don't like it. And I'm just going to get a little cup and a little spoon. And I'm just going to lift that little skin off the surface. It's all wrinkly looking, and you can kind of see it drizzling off my spoon. You see that goo? Okay. So I just lifted the skin off, I think, in one piece. And there's still a few little bits that are kind of stuck to the pot. That's okay. I'm just going to get rid of that stuff, and my milk doesn't have those proteins that coagulate at a very low temp. I'm going to keep on using this guy. And I'm going to stir this up, and this roux is pretty much cooked out. So I was kind of talking about this in the beginning. This isn't so much about chowder, okay? Yeah, that's what we're eating for dinner, but this is about learning how to thicken a liquid, right? It's about reinforcing rendering, which I've done before. It's about reinforcing that sweating and working spices and things into the mix in the beginning, which I talked about last week, right? It's all about these smaller techniques within chowder, right? And so right now we're talking about thickening a liquid. This is kind of an important thing. I do a whole class on this, right? I got Derek out there. You're talking about some roux and stuff, brown roux and all of that. I'm not looking for too brown here. I'm maybe blonde, right? That's kind of what I'm shooting for. Yeah, Chef Eddie's out there too. Right on. Eddie Lopez. Look at you, brother. Getting all of these chefs in here, folks. I hope you civilians appreciate this. This is awesome. This is awesome. Chefs, shout some cool stuff out while we're talking and teaching here, guys. If you got anything to add. Oh yeah, that's a tasty little wine. What's that called again? Folk Machine. Gotta love it. Check out Pip Wine Shop in Dixon. Oh yeah. Okay, so we were starting to talk about thickening liquids, okay? When we are thickening liquids, we tend not to dump all of the liquid into this thickening agent or roux at once, okay? If I dump it all in there, it's really hard to smooth that heavy flour stuff out. So what we do is we add a little bit of our liquid, maybe about a third of that liquid in there. We smooth that out, and then we start bringing it up to temp. I take on a flame, I start bringing it up, and as it gets hotter, it gets thicker. Those starches, those little sponges I was talking about, the starch sponges won't swell unless they get hot. And when they get hot, they go like a puffer fish, and they just soak up everything. When they hit, and they have to get all the way to a boil to do that, right? And so what we're gonna do now is we're just gonna add a little bit of our liquid. We're gonna smooth that out. We're gonna start bringing it up to temp. When it starts looking thick, we're going to add the next third of our liquid, and then we're going to add the rest of our liquid to it, right? So we do it in thirds typically, okay? Another thing to point out, since we're using milk, I was talking about how milk is a little less stable, like proteins will coagulate, and you can scorch it and things like that. When we're doing recipes that have milk and stock, we tend to use the milk first, because when the milk gets in with that roux, that starchy roux, the starch will stabilize it. Potato starch would work, rice starch would work. This is why we can make rice puddings and things like that. When you add starch and the milk together, it's less likely to coagulate and scramble on you, right? Those proteins aren't going to scramble. So we work our milk in first, and then you're going to see me start working stock in. Again, when you're making a clam chowder, it's like clam juice and milk. This is going to be milk and a white stock that I made last week. So here we go. I'm going to start out with about a third of my liquid, and the first liquid I'm using is my milk. And right now, when I'm incorporating liquid, I turn the fire off, right? And so it's on 0 right now, or 1 basically, but it's basically essentially off. In with the first big part of my milk here, milk first, and I got a little more milk left. And I am just using my spoon right now because it's really a nice roux. It's a nice oily roux. It's not a watery roux that's all clumped up. These chunks are gonna come right out. It's smoothing right out. And again, there's no heat on this, no fire. If I had the fire on this, this thing would be getting thick faster than I could have a chance to smooth out. And you need to smooth it out. I got a big old bump of that roux right there. You guys see what I'm doing. Now, I'm just using my spoon just to show you it can be done. But I think I might actually go with my whisk here in a minute, but gosh, now it is kind of actually smoothing out. I think I've got all the little roux bumps out of it, and it's completely smooth without that. But I really should, for the purposes of our demo, we're using a whisk for this. So I'm going to go through it with a whisk and really smooth it out. I don't like a whisk when when we have all these chunks in there. Okay, so again, don't have any heat and it's already thickened up, and you can see how thick it is when I drag something through there. Okay, you can't tell anything if it's just sitting there, but if you drag something through, you can definitely tell. So I'm going in with a little bit of the milk, and let's go ahead and just smooth that out. And that's all the milk I'm going to use, and the rest of this is going to be stock. And there we go. And I'm smoothing it out with my whisk. By the way, we kind of discourage too much use of the whisk because it's metal on metal. And when you have that metal grinding on that metal, you get kind of like metal in your food, right? Not kind of, but you do, right? And so we use the whisk to incorporate the liquid. And once we're done incorporating and everything's nice and smooth, get rid of the whisk and go back to the wooden spoon, okay? We use that wooden spoon a lot. You guys see me using that thing like crazy in every class, okay? So I'm setting down my whisk. This is all smooth, and it's actually pretty thick still. I'm gonna go ahead and add some of my stock. So I've got some white stock that I made last week, and I'm just gonna start working a little of that in. Oh my gosh, my camera slid. Tighten that up. There you go. So I'll do about 2 or 3 ladlefuls here. And let me really get it thin enough to where I even want to turn on the heat. Remember, once I turn on the heat, those starch granules are going to puff up like puffer fish, right? They're going to soak up the liquid, right? And so far, I haven't had any heat on this thing. I'm just trying to get things smoothed out enough to be comfortable turning on a flame under this. And I think I'm there right now. Everything is nice and smooth. And right now, I'm going to rock that flame up to about 7 out of 10. I'm going to rinse off that little whisk, and I'm back to my wooden spoon, okay? I only use that whisk while I'm incorporating liquid into that roux or roux into a liquid, okay? Now I'm back to my pot, and what I don't want to do is leave it alone because the roux wants to settle to the bottom. And the bottom is where fire is. Fire, good. Fire, our friend, but in this case, fire is going to clump that roux up on the bottom. So keep this liquid working, keep it moving. I'm going to turn this heat up even more, but keep an eye on it. I got Cynthia out there. AJ Brody, good to see you. Right on. Yeah, shout it out, guys. If you got any questions, comments, thoughts, or feelings you'd like to share with the group, if you guys would like to hug, anything like that. This is coming together. A little while ago, I said we don't know how thick this is going to be until we hit a boil, okay? That is something that I said over and over again in culinary school. I have no idea if the amount of liquid is right. Look how loose that is right now. But it's still kind of a low heat. And so this, we have no idea how thick this is going to be. As we get closer to the boil, we're going to have a better gauge on what the actual thickness of this is going to be. And I don't have to stir the entire time, but I'm not going to let a half a minute go by without stirring, quite honestly, because that roux, it wants to keep settling down. I've mentioned this in other classes. This is again, the thing with cooking is just look for patterns. You see the same things over and over again. Ooh, I hope I got enough roux in now. So that's still coming up. Set that there. And I'm going to start tying up this little bouquet garni that I showed you earlier while I'm bringing this up, because I'm just kind of sitting here stirring, and I can do more than one thing at once. I'm just going to make sure I stir it every 30 seconds or so. So I just stirred 30 seconds. Time me. I'm going to lay out some time leaves. Literally, time me. And I'm just going to bunch them up, okay? Nothing fancy here. And I'm going to wrap up a little string, get all nice and tight. And I'm going to tie it and tie it off again and throw it on in there. I didn't want to throw this in before I was using the whisk. I think I said that earlier. Like if that thing was in there and I was trying to use the whisk and smooth out the roux, that would have been a great big hassle, okay? So that's in there. Aniko is in there in the house. Kiana, Cajun chowder for dinner tomorrow. You better believe it. Or like shrimp bisque style chowder, you know, like a seafood chowder would be like a shrimp bisque style. Awesome. Okay. So I'm getting closer to the boil and I can feel just the tiniest bit of sticking on the bottom. Now you don't really want to scrape that if it gets too heavy, but right now I'm just getting things moving. And you can see that it's gotten thick, but it's still not like the chowder you're used to. Good. I hate the chowder most people are used to. Super thick clam chowder. To me, when I see super thick clam chowder, it looks to me like this restaurant made this chowder at 7 in the morning and put it on the hot line for lunch, and it's been sitting there ever since. And now it's 8 o'clock at dinner and nobody's adjusted it, or, you know, with clam juice or water or anything like that. And it's just been sitting there reducing and getting nasty. I don't like a thick chowder. So I'm getting a little closer to the boil. You can see some bubbles coming up, and that's a gauge of how thick it's going to be. You guys see when I roll my spoon through there, it flows right back together. I'm very happy with this. I got the exact right amount of liquid in there, in my opinion. But I think I will be adding more liquid because this does tend to thicken a little bit more. In fact, I'm watching it thicken before my eyes, just a little bit more. I'm going to turn this down ever so slightly because I need to get these potatoes rocking now, okay? The potatoes are going in just to cook in a liquid, right? And so I'm kind of turning this down. I don't want it really, really rocking when the potatoes go in there. And because the potatoes are so small, they're going to cook quickly without falling apart, okay? Usually we start potatoes. Usually we start them in a little bit of cold water, right? But in a hot application, if it's really, really small, they'll cook up beautifully. So I mentioned I don't like to use, I'm not going to use a peeler on these. I'm going to leave most of the peel on. I'm not going to use the whole sweet potato. I'm going to cut off about 1/3 of it. And then I'm going to work it in with these other regular kind of potato. I think I'll actually use about 1/2 of that. Just again, a little something different in my sweet potato mix, okay? I'm going to kind of wash everything with my metal spatula, or I'm sorry, my metal scrubby that I use. And it really almost takes about 1/2 of the peel off. And it's very clean. So I like some of that peel in there. I'm going to do that with my regular potatoes too. The regular kind, really give them a scrub. And I'm leaving the rest of that on there. And we're going to dice these up really quick, and then they're just going to simmer in the soup for about 8 minutes until they're done. It's pretty quick because the pieces are small. Now I got a little funky end on this here tater, so that's going first. And I'm just gonna, usually when I'm cutting potatoes, I'll stand them on end and go straight down, kind of cut them into sticks, turn straight down, right? And then I can kind of dice those up. You guys get the idea? So let me get the rest of these guys all lined up. I'm gonna stand them up. You guys see what I'm doing? I cut them twice, turn it, cut them twice, standing on end. And I've got batons now basically that I can kind of cut down. Cut those guys down. Oh, boy, that might be more potato than I need. Maybe I don't need any sweet potato, but I want some. I think I'll leave some of this back. Do something else with it. I definitely want some sweet potato in there because I'm funky like that. All right. You want a lot of potatoes in your chowder. Boy, these are kind of big actually. I cut them down a little more, some of them. Yeah, he's pretty good. There's just one piece I didn't like. And they're going in as I go, just because my board is sideways here. And again, I don't want to do too many at once. Yeah. Now I'm just kind of going for speed here. Let me give it another little stir over here. You can see them going into the chowder. Now they were a little firmer than the regular potato. And I can tell already I want to kind of thin that. I'm going to thin it in once I get these potatoes in there. Going across the regular potatoes now, the Idaho russet style. And a few more. And a few more.